Entity Framework Core 2.0 has some new features for substring matching in queries. Let's mash on that.
Hi everybody and welcome to another episode of the Asp.Net Monsters. In today's episode we're going to take a look at another new feature of Entity Framework 2.0. In today's episode it's going to be substring matching.
Yeah, this is a nice little feature that just gives us a little bit more, control over how our query gets generated when we're trying to match strings. So this was, let's just review my model just for simplicity here. We have a context that has a set of employees in it, and that's it. The employees, simply first name, last name, title, company ID, and some other things that don't matter for this example.
This is a pretty creative domain you've come up with. I don't think I've ever seen an example based on this before.
You saw it here first. So when I run this, basically all I'm trying to do here is display a page that lists out all the employees that contain whose last names contain Tibbs. And here we see we have some McTibbs, some Tibbsingtons, and some just plain old Tibbs. We've got the whole gamut here of different things. So the way typically we would have done that, Simon's smirking here, and I'm not sure why.
It just seems like a really good last name.
It is a good last name. Lots of people wish they had it. But a common way to do this before, I guess, we kind of had some string methods that would automatically get converted as part of the link to SQL portion of Entity Framework. So we had things like contain. So I could say, give me all the employees where the last name contains Tibbs. And that would generate a query that basically just checked to see if that substring was anywhere inside the string. And then we could do other things like, well, let's just view this. I'll run this again here so we can see what the query looked like. I always like to view the queries in the output window here, although they're a little small for you guys, so I'll probably zoom in. So, here's how that actually got generated. Selected from my employee table all the columns where, and then it's just checking to see if that substring is anywhere in there using a char index. So it checks to see if it exists, basically. So if Tibbs wasn't in last name, this would return -1 or 0, I guess. Wait a minute. What would that do, Simon? Greater than 0.
I guess anywhere where, well, this is going to be the char index, right? So anything that has Tibbs anywhere from the 0th position on, I mean, it must be interesting. Maybe that returns like the index of the last one, because I was thinking like if it started with Tibbs.
Yeah.
Or a strings maybe one indexed in SQL.
So that's not quite what I was expecting, and I guess that's kind of my thing with the contains. And another thing that you might have done was, okay, so that's anything that contains Tibbs, which means we also had these McTibbs, which maybe we weren't looking for. So maybe instead you wanted to do starts with. So that was another option you could query using starts with. So that should filter out the McTibbs from our database and generate a slightly different query. So let's see what that looks like now. So definitely a different query. This time we're doing where last name, that's interesting, it does like Tibbs % and left last name length of, see, I don't even know how to parse what's going on here. And there's obviously a reason why they're doing it this way. It must be more efficient or something. But it's super not obvious that that's what would have been generated.
Okay, yeah, so I understand bits of it. So it's saying anything that it starts with Tibbs and the left and I don't know, it seems like they're both doing the same thing. I would
Yeah,
have thought that
I
those
would have
queries
thought
would
that
have
we
been.
could have just done this or just done
Yeah.
this, and it would have been essentially the same, or would have been the same results.
Mm.
This is just taking the left however many characters. It's also a little odd that we're calculating that length there. I'm not sure why we're doing that, but it's an odd query anyway.
It is, for sure.
So there's this new feature now in EF Core 2 that maybe lets you write the query more like how you would have expected to. So what we can do here is I have a second collection where I'm going to do employees like Tibbs equals. So we start out the same, but here what we're going to do now, instead of using the methods that are on the string class, what we're going to do is use this function that was exposed to us by Entity Framework, and I'm just going to tell it I want to match on the last name, and I want to do Tibbs % as an example.
Okay.
So now when we run this, oh, I didn't do a toList on there. That's okay. So that first one that we looked at, or that we did, the starts with, is still that funny thing that, this is jumping around bad. Too many desktops. So there's that first one we did with the starts
so
with,
the second query
one is just a like.
Yeah, so the second one is what I would have expected Entity Framework to generate the whole time.
Yeah, me too. It's a little odd, but even so, even if they had generated it like this before, we still only really had the option to do like a starts with and maybe an ends with, and we were lacking options to do other things. So what's nice now is that we can do things like, whatever kind of pattern matching we want using the like operator, which is pretty flexible. So we could just look for the Tibbsingtons that way. And we should get a much shorter list there. And of course, like has other characters in it too that's pattern matching that I don't use very often, but it can be useful in some cases. There you go.
Great.
Okay, so Simon, you were saying the like operator in SQL, it's pretty convenient, but it might not always be very fast, I suppose.
Yeah, so the problem kind of with these like operators, depending on how you set them up, is they're very difficult to optimize. So they almost always result in a full table scan,
right?
Which, if you've got 5 rows, isn't a huge deal. But if you've got 5 billion rows, you could probably spend some time going for lunch while the query is running. So in scenarios like that, then I recommend something like full text indexing or extracting the information to a search engine or something like that. So there are certain operations inside SQL which are not efficient in SQL, and that's fine because SQL it's a general purpose query environment, so I wouldn't expect everything to be efficient there. But in those scenarios, like if you're going to be doing a lot of searching by patterns, then you might look at extracting it into Elasticsearch or something like that to do your queries.
That makes sense. There's one last thing I wanted to test here, and I didn't do this ahead of time. I have a theory about what's going to happen here, but I'm doing a toList on all my employees to load them into memory. This is a bad idea. And then going to see what happens if I try running this EF function, the like function in memory, because normally that gets converted to the SQL operator, and we obviously don't have that in memory, so I'm just kind of curious what's going to happen here when I run this.
What's your hypothesis?
That I'm going to get an exception.
I think it's going to work.
It did work. That's interesting. So they have some default behavior there then, that it's working in memory, so that's kind of neat. Be careful of that. You definitely don't want to do that, because that performance is going to be really bad. Even worse than what Simon was just talking about. So cool.
Yeah, only if you have more than 5 people, though.
That's true. That is true. All right, so yeah, that's all I had.
Great. Well, we'll see everybody on the next episode of the ASP.NET Monsters. Remember to like, comment, and share the video. And if we read your comment on the air and answer it, we will send you a sticker, which I never have one handy.
I have it here.
There we go. So make sure that you ask a question, and you might get a sticker out of it. Yay! All right. We'll see everybody next time.
Bye.